This video was supposed to be how to build Auth0 as authentication layer for a Firebase based app in Appgyver. I did record the entire video, and after 2 hours of recording, I realized that my microphone wasn't plugged in, or whatever reason it did not record my audio. Here I have an app which I have built. This app is using Firebase as a backend engine, a database engine, and then it's built based on Appgyver, and the authentication for this app is through Auth0. Now there are several things you need to set up this kind of app. First of all, and very important, you need a proxy setup, or you can set up a cloud function as a proxy in Firebase, or you can deploy cloud function in Azure, or you can even deploy a simple VM, and then you can use that VM as a proxy to use as an intermediate layer for authentication between Auth0 and Firebase. So this app is a working prototype. I could just enter here my user ID. Sorry. So let me use my phone. Does it show password? Okay, so I entered my user ID password and I'll log in. And this brings on this page where the information is pulled from Firebase. This is a user profile I created in a Firebase, and it shows up here. So if you want to see the user profile, so let's go check the Firebase. Oh, it's here. So this is my Firebase cloud storage. And this is the profile which you see it here. So for example, if I create another, if I go in here, I just add a document here, auto generate. I will say my first name is the first field, and let's say demo. Add last name and say demo1 and save. So now we have two documents. So if I go on my phone and if I refresh, this should pull a new name. Now this is the functioning, or this is the app. This is how the app works. But how does it connect? How does the components are connected or interlinked together? And for that, I'm going to explain this diagram, the flow diagram, the authentication flow diagram. So the way it works is, first of all, we went on Appgyver, entered user ID and a password, and I pressed on a login button, which brings me to Auth0. In Auth0, it verifies my user ID and a password, and if they are correct, then it returns with the Auth0 token. Now I have a Auth0 token, but from Auth0 token, I have to move forward and get a Firebase token or authenticate myself on a Firebase so I can make calls, right? So for that, then we take this token and we send it to the middleware. This is where I was explaining earlier, you need a middleware. Now this middleware, or a proxy, basically validates your Auth0 token. And if it is a valid Auth0 token, then calls Firebase and gets the custom token. This is an intermediate token. This is not the final Firebase token, which you can use it directly to log on Firebase. So after authentication, it will make a call to Firebase and is using NodeJS API between proxy and a Firebase. Then gets the custom token from Firebase. It sends back to Appgyver. Now Appgyver has two tokens. The first token is the Auth0 token, and the second token is the custom token received from proxy, which is from Firebase. Now, using this custom token, we can log into Firebase to perform database operations. So we send that custom token, and then Firebase gives us the final token, which is the token we use it for database operations. Using that final token, then we will send the data. We can send a request with a token on a header, a bearer header, and the Firebase will respond back with the response. So now, here we have three tokens. The first token is the Auth0 token. Second token is the custom token issued by Firebase to log in Firebase. And the third token and a final is the final token, which we use it for our database operations. So this is how the authentication flow works. Now, as you might know, if you know Appgyver, we do not have a Auth0 module, or we do not have a way to install Auth0 because because Appgyver doesn't even support npm modules or Node.js modules yet, or even React Native modules. So how do we do it? How we are gonna put this layer where authentication is performed on Auth0, the token is received, that token is been sent to proxy, and then from proxy we send it back to the firebase. That whole chain I embedded, or I put it in a flow function. So I wrote a flow function here. What it does is it basically makes all those three calls. So if I go in and if I show you the code, so this flow function has three parts or three components. The very first call, by taking user credentials, it sends it to the Auth0. From Auth0, so basically this is sending this object, we receive the Auth0 token. We take this token and then we send it to our middle layer custom middle layer proxy layer. Now, after receiving this token from Auth0 token on a proxy, the proxy is gonna basically make a call to Firebase and get a custom token. This is what we get, the Firebase custom token. And using this custom token, then we actually make call to Firebase directly or a Google API, and then we get the final token, which we will be using further down, to retrieve records. So this is how the flow works. Now, what all things we need? That's the most important question. We need a few things from Auth0, a few things from Firebase, and most important, we need a proxy. So again, I wrote a proxy. So let me go down here and I'll explain what proxy does. So this is a simple Node.js based proxy using Express as a web server. So it starts really from here. So this is the first part, and forget that. So this is the payload I was inspecting. So when we launch this proxy, So when we launch this proxy, we run the index file as the first file. So there are a bunch of modules we're importing, like for example, HTTPS. We need HTTPS because iOS doesn't communicate with HTTP protocol anymore. We need Express to reroute our traffic or reroute our request. Then we need a JWT barrier to verify our Auth0 token. Then we need Firebase admin. So we can use it for our Firebase custom token, and then .config module to read the .config file or .env file. So since we are running on HTTPS, we need host and a key, so we can create HTTPS on SSL. Then we verify a few few parameters. Issuer base URL is the Auth0 base URL. Audience is the API audience in Auth0, and I will show you where it is. And then the base database URL. This is the Firebase URL. It's unique per database. So that's the Firebase unique, which is maintained in env file, by the way. Then we have a credential file. So this file, we can download it from Firebase. So if you go on a Firebase under project settings, security, and I will show you that too. You can download that file. You can keep it here. This is required to authenticate in a middleware to get the custom token. Then we create the admin instance. We initialize the Firebase API, and then the further it's a routing. So in Express, we do a routing. So the first of all, this is the endpoint. So your host /API/Firebase, and I will put this proxy on GitHub so you can download and you can host it wherever you want. So host /API/Firebase. This will call this middleware, and in this middleware, basically in Express, so first parameter, it identifies what path I have to run this function for. Then there are follow-on functions. So this is one function, this is another function. So the very first function checks for the JWT token, whether this is the correct token or not. And then the second parameter executes if the first function returns a successful call. And the second function is basically in firebase.js. So when it executes, the very first thing it does, it goes to Auth0 and gets the user info. Why do we need user info? Because when we create custom token on Firebase, we need to have a unique identifier. Now this unique identifier is the UID or UUID. Unfortunately, this UID is also in Auth0. So if you make a user info call, API call, it gives you an object with email ID, name, and then the user. A user property which has sub and UID or UUID. So we can take that UUID and we can create a custom token. So that way it creates a unique key and we can use that as a reference like a user, instead direct user, we can use UID as a user. So that is why it is very important to make first call to Auth0 to get user info. Once we have user info, meaning UID, we pass that UID to Firebase admin API and we create a custom token. And then we respond with the custom token. And this is the custom token we use to log in directly on Firebase using Google API URL. So this is how it works. Now, where do we find these things? Like here, there are 4 things you need for flow function. You need your Auth0 base URL. You need Firebase web key. You need Auth0 auth object, and you need a custom token endpoint. Now, this custom token endpoint is your proxy endpoint, which I just explained in proxy here. So whatever host wherever you are going to host this proxy or the middleware, or maybe you could just take this and put it as a cloud function in Firebase or in Azure. So in my case, I don't have it. I haven't subscribed for Google services, so I cannot deploy. So for me, I just created a VM on Azure and I'm using that. Or you can do the same thing. You can create VM on any cloud provider. You basically install a basic Linux VM, and then you can deploy this proxy there, and then you can point your host. So basically the URL would be your host / this path, and the host is, like I said, you have to host it somewhere. Next, the Auth0 base URL. So this you will find it in Auth0. So if you go in Auth0 applications, so in Auth0 you have to create 2 components. First, you need to create a single page application, and it's fairly standard process to create a single page application. There's nothing special. You just create a single page application following Auth0 wizard, and that's it. So in here, you will find your domain. This domain is the base URL we needed in here. Sorry, in there. In here. So Auth0 base URL is basically a domain. Your Auth0 domain. So that is one thing you need. And then Firebase web key. Now you might know if you go in your Firebase, or if you don't know, you go in your project view, overview, you select project settings, and you will find your web API key here. This web API key is your Firebase web key. So you need this. And then Auth0 object. Now Auth0 auth object is made from different properties, and these are the properties you need: client ID, grant type, username, password. So basically you take these 2 from screen, realm, audience, and scope. Now how do you pass the object to this function, flow function? Well, basically what I did, and possibly you could do the same thing, create a variable type object and then create all these properties here. Now most of the things here are constants. So only username and password is variable. The rest, everything is constant. So in your flow function, before your flow function call, you can basically set this page variable with your properties, constants, and you can map your username and a password, and then you pass that to your flow function. So these four things you need to execute this flow function. What is the output of this flow function? Well, technically we just need the token from Firebase. That's all we need to interact with Firebase. But instead just token, I'm returning all these things. So whatever the Google API returns, that entire object, I'm returning it. So it's like it returns kind, ID token, expires in, is user new, and refresh token. So these are pretty standard properties of Google API authentication. So you will find them. If you authenticate yourself, this is what you get in a response. So this flow function returns those four properties, and we need at least two. We need the refresh token and an ID token. So we take those, we set it to the app variable, so we can use that across all the pages or sessions. And then to get the information, or to get the data, we make HTTP call. Now, remember, in Appgyver, there is an option to create Firebase a data resource here directly. If you want to add, you could add Firebase Cloud. But if you go by this approach, where you want to integrate Auth0 as a middle layer, intermediate layer for authentication, then you cannot use that. You cannot even use this API to make calls to get the records, because this built-in function does give you a token, but if you have a token, you cannot set token to this API, so you can reuse or you can use. So you have no way to authenticate. The only way you can authenticate is using user ID, user email and a password, which we don't have, unfortunately. So there's no way you will be able to set a state of this built-in function and use this. So you have to do it all manually. So to retrieve a record from Firebase, you basically make HTTP call to the Google API. Again, I will leave a link down below to the documentation of this Google API, where you can retrieve records, you'll be able to create documents, you'll be able to update documents. So basically we are calling that URL. It's a get method. We pass the header. In a header, we pass the token which we received in a last step from Google API. And whatever output we get, so here I wrote a small function to parse that, because Firebase returns in a really weird deep nested JSON object. So just to flatten it out, I'm taking all these components and then making a flat list. So it has three things: a name, which gives you a path, the collection path. So that I'm splitting and taking it as the last document ID, and then the first name and a last name. So this is the output of this custom function. I did not name it yet, but well, I'll do it. And then I set it to a app variable. So it's in a global scope. And then it dismisses the logins view. That means it brings on this screen. On this screen, we have this container, which is mapped to repeat with user list. This is the user list which is extracted from the last function, the JavaScript function where I flattened it, the flow function. So the container will repeat, and in this container we have a card, and in the card content is basically the repeat first name plus last name, and the title is the document ID. So this is how it works. When you click on a refresh, basically it makes again the same HTTP call, goes through the same process, whatever is received being processed and then set to the variable. Since this is application variable and which is bound to this container, it will refresh and you will see data on the screen. So this is how it works. This is how you can interact or integrate your Auth0 setup In Auth0, I explained your application. Then the second thing is API. So not only application, but you also need an API. And again, when you create API, it's a standard. The only thing you need to change in a standard process is the permission. You have to go in permissions tab, and then you can add multiple permissions here. Permissions are basically scopes or roles. I don't know how it is defined in other technologies, but here it's more of a scope and role, so you can restrict certain things. So pretty much that's all. You create application, create API, you basically create application, use the flow function, deploy your proxy, intermediate proxy, and you're good to go. You will be able to use Auth0 as authentication platform for your Appgyver based apps, having Firebase as a backend database. So that's all. And last thing I mentioned, I will show you where you can download the JSON file, service account key, that is here. So you go to your Firebase project overview, project settings, and service accounts, and then you click here down there, generate new private key, which will give you a file, and that file you have to use it in here. So you can create the middleware to get the custom token from Firebase. Again, so this is a prototype. I might not have considered a lot of factors to deploy in a production. So if you're planning on to deploy it in a production, I would recommend you to do a proper security review before you deploy it in a production version. So that's all in this video. I wish I could have shown you the entire process or build process, but unfortunately I could not record. So I don't have a way to show you. But if you are interested, if you have any questions, please do let me know down below in the comment, and I would be glad to have a follow-up video, or maybe have a live stream where you can interact and ask questions, and I will answer them. Thank you, and see you in the next video.